No, no, no.
Hi. Oh, you can hear me. Lovely. I have never done a round table talk before, so this should be very interesting. I'm excited for you to go on this journey with me. I have 8 minutes right now to talk about the future of video in audio. The number one question that I get when I am talking to podcasters is, how do I grow my show? I have a great show. I don't really think I have the audience that I deserve. How do I grow my show? And I talk a lot about podcast promotion and marketing and PR strategies. But the number two question that I get is, do I need to be recording video for my podcast? Raise your hand if you have thought that. Okay, that's a lot of people. And raise your hand if you are recording video for your podcast. Raise your hand if you're doing anything with that video right now. And raise your hand if you plan to do something with that video maybe over the next few months, just as a test. Okay, lovely. Good to know. Where did my clicker go? Interesting situation. I'm going to do laps. I would like for somebody to count how many times I go around. Okay, so let's talk about the future of video in audio. So let me go back. Okay, I have 3 predictions for you. And of course, I have 7 minutes right now to possibly be wrong in 12 months. So please, I'm glad you're filming, Ella. Thank you so much. All right, so video and audio. Number 1, YouTube. Do you need it? No. Might you want it? Yes. Here's where I'm thinking with that. Here's my thinking. YouTube has actually had a lot of change in the last month. In the US, you can go to youtube.com/podcasts and you can see podcasts. You can actually mark things as podcasts right now. That is not available throughout the world. Hopefully it will be soon. There's going to be a lot of changes in the next few months. Right now, I recommend that if you are already recording video, you can do something with that video, and you might as well put it on YouTube, because YouTube has a really powerful search engine. People go to YouTube to search for how to do things. It's the number 2 search engine after Google. You go there and you say, how do I build an ark? I don't know where that came from. How do I make coffee? How do I do X, Y, and Z? So if you can figure out your search terms and make it so that your podcast is searchable on YouTube, you might be able to find some new traffic. Do you need it? No. There are still a lot of people out there who want to consume your audio just as audio. They want to consume audio for the sake of audio. I am one of those people. I personally do not watch podcasts. Who here watches podcasts? It's okay if you do. That's okay. I actually spoke with somebody recently who used the phrase watch podcasts. He said, I watch podcasts. And I said, I don't know what the hell that means. But he does it. And recently, actually, there was an article by Tom Webster, who's sitting in the front row here, who said that in order to grow podcasting, we sort of need to understand the people who are not necessarily in the podcast space and how they are interacting with podcasting. And if somebody tells you that they watch podcasts, then you probably need to take that as a sign that people are watching podcasts. That was in a Sounds Profitable article. You can go to soundsprofitable.com to learn more about that. I recommend it. So do you need video? Do you need to be on YouTube? No. Might you want to be on YouTube? Yes. I think that it all comes down to, do you have the time? Do you have the resources? Do you have people in your orbit who can make high quality post-productions with the video that you're recording? Let's talk about AI. There's a lot of AI tools that are emerging, and I think that the next trend in startups, I'm going to go this way now. I think that the next trend in startups in the podcast space is actually going to be a lot of AI tools, a lot of generative AI tools. I use one right now I have a podcast called Trailer Park, the podcast Trailer Podcast, and if you were in my talk yesterday, you heard me say it 50 times. But I somehow did not get any new ratings and reviews yesterday. Very interesting. So I use a tool called AugX Labs. It's augxlabs.com. And basically what you do is you upload your file, and it generates audio, GIFs, all the things, so that it just makes your video a little bit more interesting than just having a static image up there. So I do predict that there will be more and more startups like this in the next year. Of course, with the US and the Silicon Valley Bank situation, I don't know what the funding is going to be like for all of these companies, but I do expect them to continue popping up. So if you do plan to test out video, I think these tools will be a nice option for you. Clips. This is where I recommend kind of hanging out for now. It's the safe in between ... for now. Yes, you can record your entire video. You can record your entire podcast as a video. You can have multi-camera angles. You can spend tons of money. You can do the whole thing. Or you can record little bits of it. So I work for Squadcast, which is a remote recording platform that records video and audio in high quality from anywhere, with anyone, and at any time. And what you can do with that is, yes, you can take the entire video and you can make it look nice. You can add all sorts of different, GIFs. You can add transcripts. You can make it look really pretty, put the whole thing on YouTube, break that up into clips, or you can just, at the end of your session, make sure that you stay on camera and ask your guest to stay on camera and record a few seconds with them as a promo. Take that promo, make that into all the different dimensions I mentioned yesterday in my talk on social media, that you want to make sure that when you are posting on YouTube, when you're posting on Twitter, when you're posting on Instagram, when you're posting on, I could go on all day, you are posting specifically for that platform. You are making sure that the dimensions are correct for that platform. So make sure, actually, I use another AI-generated tool called Recast Studio. Recast.studio is the website. And what you can do there is upload your audio, or actually you can search for your podcast on there. It will pop up, and then you can create different dimensions of assets. You can do Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I could go on all day. How many laps have I done? So I recommend clips for now, and that's kind of my safe way of saying I don't know where we will be in 12 months, but I do think that this is a safe in-between. So that is my presentation. Thank you so much for having me, Radio Days. That's my information. I would love to stay in touch. That's my Twitter. I'm about to hit 18,000 followers right now.
Wow, well, there you go. There's a start. Good morning, everybody. My name's James Cridland. I'm the editor of Pod News, which is a daily podcast newsletter. This is very scary being in the round. Also very scary that there's somebody in the front row who teaches TED talkers, Tamsin Webster, who teaches TED talkers to do a really good presentation. And probably one of the things that she will be saying in her book, Find the Red Thread, is not to read your notes from an iPad. So sorry about that, but I'm just going to read my notes from the iPad. Good day as well to all of my fellow Australians. Any Australians in the house? There we go. I've been living in Australia for 8 years now, and I haven't picked up the accent, as you can tell, but I've been learning about my new country in order to get my Australian passport, which I now have because, you know, Britain, Brexit. And like Czech radio, Australia is also celebrating 100 years of radio this year. So in November 1923, the first radio station started broadcasting in Australia. It was called 2SB. And if you wanted to listen, you needed to buy a special radio. It was called a sealed set, and it would only pick up 2SB. And money from that radio went to fund the programming. So when another radio station started, 2FC, a little bit later on in the year, you couldn't pick it up on the radio that you had bought to listen to 2SB, so you needed to buy another sealed set, which only picked up 2FC. And of course, that was, as you can probably guess, a resounding failure. In the first 6 months, 1,500 radios were sold. That was all. And in less than a year, the radio industry dropped the idea of sealed sets entirely. And these days, obviously, in almost every country on Earth, you buy a radio receiver, right, and it just works. Buy an FM receiver, and it'll pick up everything that you can pick up on FM here in Prague. Buy a DAB radio, it'll pick up all of the DAB radio stations. You don't need a specific thing to enjoy all of the content which is out there. When podcasting started, podcasting was open, really open. You didn't need to submit your podcast anywhere, not to Apple. Apple wasn't even involved for the first year. You just told people where your RSS feed was, and people would listen to your podcast. Open podcasting means any podcast can be enjoyed on any podcast app, just like any FM radio station can be listened to on any FM radio receiver. But the last few years have seen some changes to that. Spotify, as you probably know, uses RSS feeds, but also has its own exclusive shows, from Joe Rogan to Gemischtes Hack, from Dick and Doof to VAD to Le Poudre. Those are only available on the Spotify app. And the new sealed sets of podcasting don't just stop with Spotify. Apple Podcasts has quietly put into place exclusive podcast subscriptions only available on the Apple Podcasts app. Amazon Music has its own exclusive shows, as does Podimo, as does Luminary. YouTube is to get its own podcasts soon, too, to other countries outside of the US at some point, and circumventing the entire podcast industry, ad tech, hosting companies, everything else, while it does that. And worse, we've seen broadcasters, radio broadcasters, also making their own sealed sets for podcasting. Some private radio stations producing exclusive contents that are only available in their apps, and some public service broadcasters have forgotten the point that they're supposed to be serving the public and are instead bullying the public to download their own app because that's where they're putting their content on there. All in the quest for more data, of course. So in the next 12 months, I see this getting worse, not better. Podcasting is open. Anyone can produce a podcast that appears in the same place as podcasts from anyone else. That's incredibly, incredibly powerful, but for how much longer? So I see open podcasting seeing renewed interest in the next 12 months as the industry wakes up to the threat of an end to the open podcasting ecosystem. Indeed, open podcasting is seeing renewed interest today. Now, Pod News comes out in a couple of hours, when I've written it, but I do know what is going in today and what will be the headline, because I can announce this morning the formation of a new industry group called the Podcast Standards Project. And the Podcast Standards Project is dedicated to evangelizing and evolving open, standards-based podcasting. Participating major podcast hosting companies like Buzzsprout, RSS.com, Transistor, Acast, Captivate, and major podcast players as well, like Pocket Casts and Podverse. And the Podcast Standards Project will work on enhanced features for open podcasting, including transcripts and captions, and simpler ways to connect audiences to support their favorite show. And that's a grassroots industry coalition. It's just one example of how open podcasting can unlock the innovation and improve podcasting for audiences and creators alike. More information in a couple of hours in my newsletter at podnews.net. But what's next for podcasting in the next 12 months? I think everything revolves around keeping podcasting open. Open podcasting is a reason for podcasting's success so far and its success to come. Now, sealed sets or closed walled gardens still do have their place in this world. And indeed, there is still one country on this planet where the only radio receivers you can buy are sealed sets tuned into one frequency. And that country is North Korea. But I think things are better when they're open. So let's keep them that way. Thank you, and keep listening.
Hi everyone, my name's Emma and I am the head of metadata and publishing management at the BBC. So what that actually means in practicality is that my team sits between the people who make content and the people who make our tools and our product and try and feed requirements in both directions to make our content look as good as it can for our audiences as much of the time as we can manage. Hiding inside that publishing management is some dedicated people, including myself, who absolutely love podcasting and who care a lot about improving how the BBC does podcasting in the podcast market. So my prediction for the next 12 months is that I think we're going to hopefully see more and more ways of platforms dealing with the podcast industry, of working with podcast makers that are not just about exclusivity. So I think that's going to have its place. The BBC will have different thoughts on that to what I personally have, but we will continue to see exclusivity having a role. But I think it's interesting to see the ways that we can come to the table with podcast makers that aren't just about creating exclusive content, pulling podcasts in to be exclusive and things like that. So I guess the first commercial example I can think of is that we've seen in the last little bit of time, Amazon Music. They're trying to expand so I'm going for a mix of what James and Arielle have been doing, so I'm going to go slowly around the thing. So we've seen Amazon Music trying to create an offer to bring Prime, not people paying extra, people who already subscribe to Prime, having some type of an extra reason to use Amazon Music for their podcasts, and they've done that by taking the RSS RSS feeds of popular podcasts and stripping all the ads out. They did that by paying for them. So that took a huge amount of resource, but now if you're an Amazon Prime subscriber, you can go into Amazon Music and get a slightly better experience than using your current RSS player in terms of the audio, where they are in terms of feature comparison and parity for content management and things like that. It's going to be up to your personal preference for how granular you want to speed up your podcast and things like that. So that's someone in the commercial space with gobs of money to throw at a problem, thinking about what they can do that isn't just buying content and stopping other platforms from having it. And that's probably a reasonable thing to do, given the share of market that Amazon have right now. But it's been a really successful one. So I've heard James talking about the big people who've grown over the last 12 months. Amazon were in there, and potentially because of a strategy like this. At the BBC, over the last year, we've been doing a much smaller scale experiment, but something along the same lines, thinking about how can we provide value to the podcast industry and to our listeners. And we've, the internal name for that was the Acquisitions Project. So because we have a government organisation of Ofcom that looks after all the work we do, chains and distribution have to go via them. They approved a small trial. What that meant was we took 10 titles from UK providers, or produced in the UK, one of them was from TED, and historically when we've acquired content for BBC Sounds, we have acquired content over the last 5 years. In general, what that meant was we gave you a lump sum, you gave us a file, we hired potentially a freelancer to flick it onto our publishing system. It showed up in Sounds. No one knew to look for it. No one knew to find it. It probably got a medium number of listens. Didn't work out that great in terms of cost per listener. So when this idea floated again, I jumped up and said, we have done this before, it's not working. Can we think about meeting the industry on its terms? So what we came up with was a slightly different system. And I'm glad to say it's worked out enough that we'll be expanding that over the next year in a way that involves dozens, not thousands, more podcasts, but that we've got the resource to keep going with this. But basically what it involves is taking that content and publishing again on Sounds, but essentially paying a processing fee for the difficulty of dealing with the BBC. We're asking you to spend some time, give us something that already exists on RSS. We'd like to compensate you for that so you're not wasting your time with us. But then you get paid a similar to an ad rate. Every listen you get on Sounds, we set a rate and you get paid by volume. And one of the great things about that is it puts us in the same business as a podcaster. So the downside of something like setting a flat fee is that if you're earning money on RSS per listen and we give you a flat fee, the absolute best thing that can happen for you as an independent podcaster is no one listens on BBC Sounds, because then you get the most money. People hear about it on BBC Sounds, then go to Apple or Spotify to listen. So we needed to get in the same business as the podcasters, and that means incentivizing everyone in the same way. So we've tried to pick a rate that sort of aligns with the average in the UK market for dynamic ad insertion. So it means that the hugest podcasts probably won't want to work with us. It's not worth their time. But the goal here as well is to put something good into the industry to help start professionalizing small podcasters, and also to introduce some potentially well-known podcasts to our audience, our core audience, who may not know about them. Because we all know, even the most popular podcasts, if you were out in the street telling people about them, not everyone would know what you're talking about. So for me, this feels like a really positive way that we can give something new to our listeners, do that public service, but to the industry, not just to the end listeners. There's obviously lots and lots more to this, but for me, it feels like a really positive step for how we can interact with our internal industry and meet them on their terms, not just sit as radio people over the top of an industry that's growing and thriving and doing really well, but genuinely contribute to it in a way that's not about a short-term incubation project, which are also really valuable, but quite often then stop and need. And there's things we can talk about ways that these things can work together. Do an incubation project, then feed people onto an acquisition deal. We've taught you some things, we've helped you work with professionals, now you're going off in public, but guess what? Your first professional deal is signed right now. Every listen you get on Sounds, for future episodes, you'll get paid for. So those kind of things, I think, there's lots of benefits here at a relatively small investment level for public service broadcasters. Something we can do that, as I say, is in the industry on the terms it wants to be on, and really is a net good, I think, for the way that we're all operating. And I think in the public service space, in the commercial space, I'm really hoping we see more of those types of arrangements moving into the next bit of time. How am I doing for time, Sam? Okay, I'm going to leave it there.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to take lessons from all of my colleagues and just kind of come up with some system that doesn't really work to talk to all of you. And I have notes, too, so I'm going to try to work with that. My name is Eric Nuzum. Along with my co-founder, I run a podcast consulting and production company based in New York called Magnificent Noise. And I don't have fancy QR codes or whatever. I have a newsletter that comes out whenever I feel like it called The Audio Insurgent. You can find out more about that at audioinsurgent.com, and it's free to sign up. So I've been asked to talk about the concept of market saturation and how I think that's going to change over the next 12 months. And I've found that to be, and let me define it to be clear, market saturation means that there are too many podcasts, generally, or in your genre, or in a certain type of category, or that where people are making, depending on whose math you use, there are as many as 1,000 new podcasts that come out every day. That's 1,000 new podcasts every day. That means that when I'm done talking, there will be 10 podcasts that didn't exist when I started talking. And it can be overwhelming to creators. There's too many podcasts. How am I ever going to find space? And I struggled with this charge today to talk about market saturation for two reasons. One, I generally don't make predictions. I don't like doing that. I'd rather talk about what's going on right now that we can learn from and what can instruct us in the future. And secondly, I don't believe that market saturation is a real problem. I think it's a manufactured problem. It's an excuse. And I'm going to talk to you about why. So when Sunday's podcast workshop started, Sam did something very similar to what he did today. He asked people to raise their hands, a bunch of questions. Like, are you making a podcast? Yes. Or you've been in podcasting for 10 years, just like he did today. And the last question he asked was, how many of you in the room are happy with your podcast? And about 1/3 of the people who said they were making podcasts raised their hands. And I could not get this out of my head ever since. I have made dozens and dozens of podcasts that have been downloaded hundreds of millions of times. And I don't say that to brag, but I say it to tell you that I have never been happy about a single thing that I've ever made. Right? If you talk to many creators, especially people who are making podcasts that you admire, they have something in common. It's like a compulsion. It's an urge. It's an itch that you cannot scratch. And that's to keep trying to make something better, to keep pushing, to keep trying to take it to the next level, to find the thing that isn't working and fix it and tweak it. People who work with me know that I will not stop touching something until someone takes it away from me and gives it to the rest of the world. I also can't listen to things that I made in the past because all I hear is the things I still needed to change. It's a never-ending issue. And the reason that I've never been happy is because happiness leads to complacency. And complacency is giving in or giving up on that urge to keep pushing. And I think those who are happy and those who are complacent are the ones who complain about market saturation. Market saturation is real, but it is only an issue for those who are satisfied making mediocre content, who are satisfied with the okay. They're satisfied with the good enough. They're satisfied with not pushing themselves and their colleagues to create something that's not just good, but great. I often tell people that we kind of create an environment in our company where the podcasts we make are as good as we can possibly make. The biggest restriction is us. It's not money, it's not time, it's not external factors. Find my place in my notes, I got so carried away. So creators have that compulsion. And missing that compulsion, you often look for external factors to blame. And I'll actually make one prediction today. It's that everyone, in 12 months' time, at this conference next year, everyone who raised their hand and said they were happy will come back and wonder at this conference, wondering why their podcast hasn't grown, why they haven't won any awards, why they can't achieve the revenue that they think they need to make their podcast, and they'll blame external factors, like market saturation and discoverability. Podcasting's low barrier to entry gives everyone a chance to tell their story and share their idea, and I think that's great. But it doesn't mean that everyone is going to be successful. You are not entitled to an audience. You do not deserve an audience. You earn an audience. When it comes to monetization and ad revenue, you don't deserve it. You earn it by the choices you make. And if you want those things and don't have them, don't blame external forces like market saturation. Realize that one of the principal reasons you don't have it is because you are not trying hard enough. Now, Unfortunately, what I've said is very convenient because trying harder means more work. And that's hard. But success is hard. And podcasting, if anything is happening now in the podcasting industry, it's reality is coming into the marketing or into the podcast industry that the easy days are over, and we really have to focus on making our work exceptional and good. And I think that if that's one good thing that will come out of this recessionary era in podcasting that's happening right now, it's that a lot of people who aren't willing to do that work aren't going to do that work anymore because success is not easy. If you really care about your podcast and that drive lives inside of you, all you have to do is find ways to bring it out, even a little bit. If you only have a small amount of time, like an afternoon, what can you do to make that podcast better? You have to push yourself in order to move your work from good to great. Something I do, and I encourage all of you to do too, is I treat every episode like it's the last chance I'm ever going to get to do the thing that I love. Every episode. Treat every moment you turn on a microphone like it's your last chance to capture the human experience. And every time you speak, treat it like it's the last time you're going to be heard. And make it matter that much. Every time, I already said that. Right. There are 1,000 new podcasts today. But make sure that even your most skeptical listener and hardest critic will believe that you have transformed your idea into something that's unlike any other. My hope is that next year, and perhaps even this is a prediction too, is that there will be a group, when this group comes together, there will be several people here who've heard these words, decided to try a little harder, and can come back and share their journey to inspire other people as well. And next time you have a meeting on podcasting, and someone wants to talk about market saturation or discoverability, run the other direction, right? Be wary of the things that wish to distract you. It's something I tell my staff all the time. Be wary of the things that intend to distract you. And so that's it. Make great things. Thank you very much.
Woo! Let's come up, guys. Let's all come up. Okay, fine. So we've got 10 minutes, so we're going to have a bit of a chat about some of the things that were discussed. And actually, I'm just going to start with you guys. Does anyone have a question for any of our speakers or a kind of thought on anything that people said? Yes. So let's start over there. Great. Do you want to just introduce yourself and then go for it?
Hi, Anders from the Danish Broadcasting Corporation. I have a question for Mr. Cridland. I just thought about your comparison with radio receivers and apps. Wouldn't the comparison be better if it was radio receivers and phones and radio stations and apps? If you understand my question.
And thank you so much for tweeting me that question ahead of time, so I could actually think of a good answer. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think that the nuance there is, and I should know a few things about apps because, humble brag, I launched the world's first mobile phone app back in 2005. It streamed 3 different radio stations and was available on 6 Symbian phones. I've always thought about owned apps as being for your preference one listener, for people who are your fans. They will download your app because it offers a better experience for your individual radio station, but they won't use that as a discovery mechanism to find your radio station in the first place. And finding your radio station in the first place is a massively important thing as well. And so making sure that you are available everywhere, but then making sure that you offer the best experience for your committed listeners on your app is a great plan. So yeah, I think that there's some good nuance there that you've uncovered. Yeah, thank you, Anders.
I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that. Either of you guys know. Any other questions from in the room? I mean, my main... Yeah, okay, come one sec. So one of my thoughts listening to you guys, and I don't know what you think or maybe others, and actually, I mean, you were kind of just talking about it, I think Tom Webster in the last session that I sat in, is I think what you're saying is we're going to keep growing, but maybe we're going to grow a bit less than we grew last year. That's what is my sense from some of the things that you guys said. I don't know what you feel about that.
I have a thought. I think that independent creators will always continue to independently create, and I think that that's where a lot of the 1,000 number comes from. Is you have an idea, you know, your friend who you meet at the bar later today, who you tell that you were at a podcast/radio conference, they're going to say, "Oh, a podcast! I've always been told that I should start a podcast." Those people are going to continue to create. Some of them might be great. Some of them might make money. Some of them will crash and burn after 2 episodes. We will continue to grow, and the way that listenership will grow is that some of those shows are going to be so great that they're going to bring about new audiences. But you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that a ton of money is going to come into the podcast space this year. But I do think that, like, I think the reason I bring this up is to say that people should be trying. People all over the world should be trying to make shows in different niches so that we can reach audiences of different niches, so that we can find advertisers of different niches, so that we can get creators paid. And I think that that will trickle up, actually.
Similar to what Arielle's just said, I think, like, for broadcasters, I feel like over the last decades we've moved from a model where radio was constantly being modelled against, or audio generally, but radio as it was being modelled against TV. How we like TV, can we use the systems of TV? And we know there's always been a business where people can be a TV production company and just make money off making and selling TV shows without having to do all of the other work we have to do in audio. And so I think probably the place we're moving to is moving to being something a bit more like the publishing industry. So no one says that HarperCollins should shut down because Amazon have got a self-publishing arm and are publishing tons and tons of like interesting thought, you know, like some thoughtless, some thoughtful content. I think we're moving to a place where no one says that, well, people do say there are too many books, but the idea of having that, you know, full backlist of all the books in the world, all the podcasts in the world, the many, many ways to make your book or podcast a real thing, I think there's a lot more similarities there, and I just think it will be that same sense of discernment. Some things will rise through, some things, and the number of different ways that can happen just feels like a really positive thing to me. The fact that you can record something on your iPhone, if it's got and you've got the dedication and the other thoughtfulness that goes around building that over time that can organically grow into something amazing, feels really like a positive thing to me.
Cool. Okay, we have a question over here. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Cristiana, I'm from Romania, and I work for a podcast that has almost 400K subscribers on YouTube. It's a video podcast. And I will have a question for you. You said that if you don't record all the podcast in video, you can make some bits and clips. But if you already have the equipment and the team, why do you only record small portions of it and not all the podcast? What is the strategy behind this?
If you're already recording, you should continue.
Yes, but
Yeah.
I also work for a podcast network, and we have almost 10 podcasts in the making. So that's why I'm asking you, why do you believe it's good to make some mini clips from a podcast? It's more interesting.
Mostly because the sheer volume of people who are on TikTok or Reels or even YouTube Shorts is huge. So you can experiment with different, you know, eye contact to the camera, with different styles. You can experiment with which parts of the episode you are putting out there to potentially draw people in to check out the podcast on the whole. I think it really, like, with podcasting, to put out a full episode is great. But, you know, you might get however many people listening to your podcast. And it's a closed circuit for the most part. It's hard to gain new listeners. Whereas the algorithm that is afforded to you on YouTube or on Instagram Reels or on TikTok, your video can get pushed out to people that, you know, might not be in your orbit generally, might not be partaking in your keywords otherwise. So I just think that the possibility of all of these people coming to you is huge and could potentially bring people to click on your profile, which could bring people to click on your podcast, which could get people to listen to your podcast. So I think it's a volume thing.
If someone find you the mini clips and looks for the podcast and they see the podcast is not all video, wouldn't be they disappointed?
If you are making a podcast for the sake of making a podcast with audio, I think it's okay to disappoint some people.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, if you look If you look at what a podcast, the definition of a podcast, you can have a long conversation about RSS feeds with enclosures, which I find a little bit dull. But actually, the definition of a podcast is a piece of audio-first content. And that can have video on it, if you like. That's absolutely fine. It's called a video podcast then, and that's absolutely fine. But we're not making TV here. If you're making a true crime podcast, then you can make a great true crime documentary and go out and film all of the places. That's absolutely fine. But that's called a documentary, or in Australia, a doco. And that's not necessarily a podcast. A podcast is a piece of audio-first entertainment or content that you can enjoy just as well if you close your eyes. And I think that's probably the difference there. And I worry that we sometimes get a little bit hung up about making television when actually we're in the business of making great audio.
So my question was, I'm really excited about the new organization that you're kicking off, James.
And I should just say, I'm not. It's not me. I'm just telling you that that it's happened. Yeah.
You almost got yourself a new job there. Wow.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting because I think it's felt like we haven't, as an industry, been able to come together on that. And a lot of the direction is knowing how to ask of the partners that we work with for it. So I guess my question to you is, how do we ask our hosting providers or make the case to our hosting providers to integrate it? And then my question to you is, how do we petition the apps of any size, because it's not just Apple and Spotify, to consider ingesting them?
Because it felt to me like I think maybe three out of the four of you guys are kind of saying, actually, maybe we're going to lose a bit more control in the next 12 months. Like we've never really been in control in podcasting, but we're kind of losing a little bit more control, possibly.
I mean, I think the worry is YouTube. The worry is YouTube coming in. If I was a podcast hosting company, or if I was involved in ad tech, which is what Brian's newsletter is all about, or if I was involved in any of the other bits of the podcasting industry so far, YouTube has no interest in any of that. YouTube is diverting away from all of that and just throwing everything into the YouTube, ecosystem, and away you go. And so that's a real concern. It's also very exciting for a creator because it's a whole new audience that we haven't actually had in the past. But yeah, it just worries me that yes, there is a big loss of control, and control from creators is a really important thing here.
Eric, you're going to jump in.
Yeah. Oftentimes when we cede control, we're doing just that. We're giving up control. It's a choice we make because we think we're getting something back that's bigger in exchange. And I would question any time that someone says, hey, I just want you to change the way that podcasting works a tiny little bit to accommodate this thing. It's like, whose problem are you solving? Ask that question. Yeah. Is it my problem? Then maybe we can have a conversation. Am I giving up more than I'm ever going to get? And you talk about YouTube, talk about a trail of broken promises about podcasting. I wouldn't trust them with anything. I'm happy to sit back and let them demonstrate that and earn my trust.
And then I guess to picking up on the how do we petition apps, I think it depends on, so speaking from the perspective of someone who works for a public service broadcaster, right now our app is not a platform in the sense, well, obviously it is in the most broad sense, but we are a publisher publishing all our content to the standard that is required to us and that we're held to by law. So the way that we've gone about this is not by ingesting RSS feeds, and part of the reason the scale of that trial is I need to resource producers and assistant producers who can check that that content meets our editorial standards, because we then publish it. And I guess there was very clear public discussions where we had a previous Director General who was very enthusiastic about the BBC Sounds becoming a podcast platform. Not just a publisher. And in reality, that then ran up against all the other ways that the BBC is. So it's partly just things like right now, and by the way the BBC is right now, at its heart, a content maker. So that change of making us into a platform turns us into a tech company, and I'm not sure we're ready to be a tech company. Right now we're doing a digital transformation to try and be a digital content maker. That's a different thing than being in direct competition trying to prove that we're the best platform. Some of that's around things like, right now, we're a lot about content discovery. How do we help people discover our content? But I guess from a user perspective, I would ask whether the better question for people who are looking to be aggregators is, what's the best way to manage the content I already know I like, rather than constantly being shown the fire hose of new content that the BBC is creating to the high standard in all the different areas that it's making. But we're not pivoted that way. The idea that we already have 225,000 plus items live in sounds that are made by the BBC, then ingesting all of the other items that exist in the world. I guess also then how does your branding look against that? Like what gate do we put in place to say like, and we all know how flexible RSS is. We bring in a podcast one day, but it changes its title as it shifts suddenly to become a wild anti-vax title. That then starts playing against the BBC logo. People can screenshot. Like, there's so many reputational things caught up in the way that it ran into a lot of practical problems and was dropped. And then I've managed to resurrect it as this very selected, how can we help the UK industry and UK listeners connect with some content that stretches their listen, like how Heartland people stretches their listen, start thinking about just beyond that edges. And I guess for us, the content that worked best was those things that had a little bit of that was a podcasty twist on stuff we already had. So that's where we're at right now. We're far away from being a platform.
Guys, thank you so much. The future's bright. The future is podcast.
So thanks to everyone. The next session here starts 12:05. It's going to be about radio and podcasting, so be sure to be back.